Everyone avoided the rich and unbearable man until the new waitress challenged him. She, undaunted by his power, treated him as an equal. The shock was so great that he lost control in the face of her boldness. What no one imagined was that this challenge would change the destiny of both in an explosive way. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The silence of the mansion was deafening. Robert Anderson adjusted the knot of his Italian tie in front of the Venetian crystal mirror, observing the reflection of a man he no longer recognized. At 38, his impeccable appearance hid a soul fragmented into 1,000 pieces. His perfectly combed black hair framed a face that had become a mask of calculated coldness. 3 years, 3 long years since Elizabeth had departed, taking with her any trace of human warmth that still remained in his chest. The accident had been so sudden, so cruel, that Robert simply decided he would never allow himself to feel again. It was safer that way, more controllable. He descended the Carrara marble stairs toward his office, where piles of documents awaited him. Routine was his only faithful companion now. Meetings at 8 in the morning, business lunches, more meetings until late afternoon. Then, he would return home and repeat the cycle the next day. Weekends were filled with financial reports and market analyses, anything to keep his mind occupied, away from the memories that insisted on haunting him in moments of quietude. The housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, a 60-year-old lady who had worked for the family for decades, approached discreetly. She was one of the few people who still dared to speak to him without being asked. "Mr. Anderson, breakfast is served in the dining room." He nodded briefly without taking his eyes off the papers. Mrs. Wilson hesitated for a moment as if she was going to say something more but thought better of it and withdrew. Robert noticed the hesitation, but pretended not to. He knew she worried about him, but displays of affection were something he could no longer process properly. In the office, his personal assistant, Michael, was already waiting with the day's agenda. Michael had been working for him for 5 years and had learned to keep interactions strictly professional. In the early days after the accident, he had tried some warmer approaches, asking about the boss's well-being, but Robert quickly made it clear that he preferred to keep things objective. "Mr. Anderson, we have the meeting with the Japanese investors at 9. Then the meeting with the construction company's board at 11. Lunch is scheduled with the mayor to discuss the shopping center project, and at 3 in the afternoon, we have the presentation of the new developments." Robert nodded mechanically. It was like this every day, an endless sequence of commitments that kept him away from himself. His businesses prospered impressively, as if his emotional coldness had transformed into a competitive advantage. He negotiated without mercy, decided without hesitation, and never showed weakness. Competitors feared him, partners respected him, and employees avoided him whenever possible. During the meeting with the Japanese investors, Robert conducted negotiations with his usual surgical precision. Numbers, projections, guarantees, everything came out of his mouth with a coldness that impressed even the most experienced businessman. When one of the investors tried to start a more personal conversation, asking about his family, Robert simply replied that he preferred to keep the focus on business. The awkwardness was palpable, but he didn't care. Lunch with the mayor proceeded the same way. Robert presented his proposal with irrefutable data, economic growth projections for the city, and promises of job creation. All very technical, very calculated. When the mayor tried to make a joke to lighten the atmosphere, Robert maintained his impassive expression, responding only with a polite but distant, Back at the office, he found a stack of social invitations on his desk. Inaugurations, charity dinners, graduations from courses he sponsored. Michael had separated those he considered most important for the company's image. Robert quickly glanced at them and pushed everything aside. "Decline all of them," he said dryly. "But sir, some of these events are important to maintain our business relationships." Robert raised his eyes from the documents, and Michael immediately fell silent. That look was known by everyone in the company. It was the look that ended any discussion before it even began. The late afternoon arrived as it always did. with Robert still immersed in spreadsheets and contracts. Most employees had already gone home, but he remained in the office until 10 at night. When he finally decided to go home, the city was already asleep. On the road, driving his black Mercedes, Robert passed places he used to frequent with Elizabeth: the cafe where they had breakfast on Sundays, the park where they walked hand in hand, the cinema where they watched their last movie together. He accelerated, trying to leave the memories behind along with the places. At home, solitude welcomed him like an old acquaintance. He went straight up to his room without dinner. Mrs. Wilson had left a covered plate in the refrigerator, as she did every night, but Robert rarely ate properly. Food had lost its flavor, just like everything else in his life. Lying on the king-size bed that seemed like an ocean of emptiness, Robert stared at the ceiling for hours. Sleep was always elusive, arriving only in the early hours of dawn, when exhaustion finally overcame his restless mind. In the rare moments when he managed to fall asleep, he dreamed of Elizabeth. He always woke up with the feeling of loss renewing itself, as if he discovered her departure for the first time every morning. The days repeated themselves in a monotony that he had embraced as a protective shield. Work, numbers, cold decisions, growing profits. Everything worked perfectly on the surface, but inside, Robert knew he was dying slowly. Not physically, but in a way that was perhaps even more cruel. He was losing the ability to be human. 6 months later, on a rainy Thursday, in September, something changed in Robert's meticulously planned routine. His personal driver had fallen ill, and Michael was in an external meeting. By a coincidence that he would later consider destiny, Robert found himself driving alone through the city streets during lunch hour. The restaurant where he always had lunch, a 5-star establishment frequented by the business elite, was packed. The waiting line was at least 40 minutes. Normally he would wait or ask Michael to resolve the situation, but that day, driven by a restlessness he couldn't explain, Robert decided to look for another place. He drove aimlessly through the streets until hunger spoke louder. He stopped in front of a small restaurant with a modest appearance, with a simple facade and some formica tables on the sidewalk. "Home flavor," said the unpretentious sign at the entrance. Robert hesitated. It had been years since he had entered a place like that, but his stomach growled, and he decided that a quick meal would be sufficient. The interior was cozy in a way that he had forgotten existed. Wooden tables worn by time, mismatched but clean chairs, and a smell of lovingly seasoned food that immediately awakened childhood memories when his grandmother was still alive and cooked for the family. That's when he saw her. Jessica appeared, carrying a tray with steaming plates, her brown hair tied in a practical bun, a simple apron protecting her white blouse. She noticed him standing at the entrance and waved to an empty table in the corner. "You can sit wherever you want. I'll be with you shortly," she said naturally, without any reverence or nervousness. Robert headed to the indicated table, intrigued. He was used to waiters who practically bowed before him, with maitre d's who greeted him by name and led him to the best tables. This woman had treated him as she would treat any ordinary customer. Jessica approached a few minutes later with a professional but genuine smile. "First time here?" she asked, holding a small order pad. "I recommend the daily special. Chicken stroganoff with rice, shoestring potatoes and salad. Mrs. Jenkins put special care into the seasoning." Robert studied the simple menu, laminated and with some signs of use. The prices were negligible compared to what he was used to paying. "The daily special will do," he replied, more because he didn't know what else to order than out of conviction. "To drink?" "Water." "Tap water, or would you prefer sparkling?" "Tap is fine." Jessica noted the order and walked away without further ceremony. Robert found himself observing her work. She moved efficiently between tables, chatted briefly with other customers, smiled when appropriate, but always maintained a professional and respectful posture. There was nothing exceptional about her, at least not at first glance. She was beautiful in a natural way, without artifice, but what most caught Robert's attention was her complete indifference to the fact that he clearly didn't belong in that environment. The Italian suit, the Swiss watch, the genuine leather, shoes. None of this seemed to impress or intimidate her. She treated him exactly as she treated the construction worker at the next table or the street vendor who had come in just for a coffee. When she brought the plate, Robert was surprised by the aroma. It had been so long since he had eaten something that smelled like real food that for a moment he felt almost nostalgic. "Enjoy your meal," said Jessica, placing the plate in front of him. "Thank you." She was about to walk away when Robert, driven by a sudden curiosity, called her back. "Excuse me, what's your name?" "Jessica. Is there a problem with your order?" No, everything's fine." She nodded and continued her work. Robert began to eat and was surprised once again. The food was really good. Not sophisticated, but prepared with care and just the right amount of seasoning. It was different from everything he had tasted in recent years. It tasted of affection, of someone who really cared about the result. As he ate, Robert discreetly observed the restaurant's movement. It was a popular environment, frequented by working people who came there not for status, but for the quality of food and honest prices. Jessica knew most customers by name, asked about their families, remembered their favorite dishes. There was a genuine intimacy in those interactions that Robert had forgotten could exist. When he finished eating, Jessica approached to collect the plate. "How was it?" "Very good," replied Robert, and for the first time in years, he was being completely honest about something that didn't involve business. "Mrs. Jenkins will be happy to hear that. She's always concerned if the seasoning is just right." Robert paid the bill, an amount he would normally spend just on the tip in other places, and left a generous amount as extra. Jessica thanked him without exaggeration, as if it were something natural. Back at the office, Robert found himself thinking about lunch, not about the business he needed to resolve or the afternoon meetings, but about that small restaurant and the woman who had served him with such naturalness. There was something about that experience that had moved him in a way he couldn't explain. In the days that followed, even with the driver back and Michael available to resolve any food issues, Robert found himself returning to home flavor. First, it was just curiosity. Then it became a need that he himself didn't understand. He always ordered the daily special, was always served by Jessica, always left with a strange feeling that something in his life was beginning to move. Jessica would greet him with a cordial nod, already knew he preferred the corner table and that he liked tap water, but she continued to treat him with the same simplicity as on the first day, showing no curiosity about who he was or what he did. To her, Robert was simply another customer who appeared regularly for lunch. 2 weeks later, Robert was already considered a regular customer at Home Flavor. Mrs. Jenkins, the owner, a robust lady with graying hair, had begun to greet him personally, always asking if he was enjoying the food. Robert, who normally felt uncomfortable with familiarities, discovered that he didn't mind the woman's genuine cordiality. It was on a Friday afternoon that Robert noticed something different about Jessica. She seemed more tired than usual, and there was a subtle worry in her eyes that he, trained to observe details in negotiations, didn't miss. "Today's dish is delicious," commented Robert when she came to collect his empty plate. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," replied Jessica, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Robert hesitated. It wasn't his habit to get involved in other people's personal problems, but there was something in her expression that awakened an unexpected concern in him. "Is everything okay?" he asked, surprising himself. Jessica looked at him with a mixture of surprise and caution. Customers rarely took an interest in her personal life beyond basic formalities. "Just a long day," she responded diplomatically. Robert nodded and didn't insist, but the answer left him restless for the rest of the afternoon. During the meeting with partners, he found himself thinking about Jessica's worried expression, which irritated him deeply. Why was he wasting mental energy on a stranger? The next day, Saturday, Robert broke a self-imposed rule. He went to lunch at the restaurant outside his usual work schedule. Home Flavor was busier than during the week, with families occupying tables and a more relaxed atmosphere. Jessica seemed genuinely surprised to see him. "Didn't expect to see you on a Saturday," she commented, guiding him to a table. "Decided to vary my routine," Robert lied. During lunch, he observed that Jessica worked with the same efficiency as always, but there was a tension in her movements that she couldn't completely hide. When she brought the bill, Robert made an impulsive decision. "Jessica, may I ask you a personal question?" She looked at him cautiously. "Depends on the question." "You seem worried about something. If it's indiscreet, I apologize, but is everything really okay?" For a moment, Jessica seemed to struggle with the decision to trust him or not. Finally, she sighed softly. "My mother is in the hospital. Nothing serious, but the tests are costing more than I expected." Robert felt something move in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Compassion, genuine, concern for another person. "I'm sorry, is your mother getting better?" "She's recovering, thank God, but well, it's complicated juggling the bills sometimes." Robert wanted to ask more, wanted to offer help, but realized it would be inappropriate. They barely knew each other, and a financial offer could be interpreted as offensive or embarrassing. "If you need anything," he began, without knowing exactly how to finish the sentence. Jessica smiled, this time genuinely. "Thank you, that's kind of you, but we'll be fine. We always are." There was a strength in those words that Robert admired. Jessica wasn't victimizing herself or seeking pity. She was simply dealing with life's challenges with a dignity that he had long lost. In the days that followed, Robert found himself thinking more and more about Jessica. He discovered that she worked not only at the restaurant, but also at a clothing store in the evening. He learned through casual conversations that she had interrupted her physical therapy course to care for her mother and support the household. He also learned that she dreamed of resuming her studies one day, but that immediate responsibilities always came first. Her story contrasted drastically with his own life. While Robert drowned in self-pity and isolation, Jessica faced real difficulties, with a quiet courage that impressed him and in a way shamed him. It was during a board meeting that Robert realized how much his routine had changed. Victoria Reynolds, the marketing director, and an old family acquaintance made a comment that put him on alert. "Robert, you've seemed different lately," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "More distracted. Is everything okay?" "I'm perfectly fine," replied Robert more dryly than he intended. Of course, it's just that, well, some people have been commenting that you've been going out for lunch a lot. That's not your usual habit." Robert felt a growing irritation. "Since when are my eating habits company business?" "They're not, of course," said Victoria quickly. "It's just concern. You know how people talk. Especially after everything that happened." The reference to Elizabeth's departure was like a slap in the face. Robert stood up abruptly. "This meeting is over," he declared, leaving the room. Later, alone in his office, Robert reflected on Victoria's words. She was right about one thing. He was different. For the first time in 3 years, something had managed to pierce the ice armor he had built around himself, and that scared him as much as it intrigued him. Victoria, for her part, wasn't just concerned about Robert's well-being. She had harbored feelings for him long before his marriage to Elizabeth, and after the tragedy, had patiently waited for him to recover. Seeing him show interest in anything other than work made her uneasy, especially because her sources had told her about the regular lunches at a popular restaurant in the city. That afternoon, Victoria decided to conduct a little personal investigation. She drove to Home Flavor and observed from afar. She saw Robert entering, saw the naturalness with which Jessica greeted him, saw the way he seemed to relax in that simple environment. And that deeply concerned her. Robert didn't realize he was being observed. That day, for the first time, he managed to make Jessica laugh genuinely with an observation about Mrs. Jenkins's peculiarity of seasoning the food by talking to the ingredients. The sound of her laughter was like music to his ears, pure, without artifice, completely different from the calculated laughs he was used to hearing in his social circle. When he left the restaurant that afternoon, Robert felt lighter than he had felt in years. He couldn't define exactly what was happening, but for the first time since Elizabeth's departure, he was looking forward to the next day. Not for business or meetings, but for the possibility of seeing again that woman who made him feel more human. The month of October brought with it a change in the air that Robert felt long before he could name it. His visits to Home Flavor had become the highlight of his days, and his relationship with Jessica had evolved from simple cordiality to something that dangerously resembled friendship. She had begun to tell small stories about her life, how she had learned to cook with her grandmother, her hopes of returning to school, the small joys she found in caring for her mother. Robert, in turn, found himself sharing memories he had kept locked away for years. He talked about his childhood, about Sundays at his grandmother's house, about how he had built his business empire practically from scratch. He never mentioned Elizabeth, but Jessica seemed to intuit that there was deep pain behind his controlled facade. It was on a rainy Tuesday that everything began to fall apart. Robert arrived at the restaurant to find Jessica visibly shaken. Her hands trembled slightly as she served customers, and she avoided direct eye contact. "Jessica, what's wrong?" asked Robert as soon as he managed a moment alone with her. "It's nothing," she murmured, but her voice betrayed her desperation. "Please, tell me." She looked into his eyes, and Robert saw contained tears there. "My mother had to be hospitalized. Again. The doctors say she needs urgent surgery, but my health insurance doesn't cover the procedure. I just don't know what to do." Robert felt his heart contract in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Without hesitation, he took the checkbook from his pocket. "How much do you need?" Jessica recoiled as if she had been slapped. "No, I can't accept that." "Why not? It's just money." "For you, maybe. For me, it would be accepting charity, and I don't do that." "It's not charity, it's help between friends." Jessica shook her head vigorously. "We barely know each other. You don't even know my last name." Robert realized she was right. All that closeness he felt was built on superficial conversations and stolen moments between orders and service. He knew as little about her as she did about him. "Then tell me everything. Your last name, your story, your dreams." "Let me get to know you for real." For a moment, Jessica seemed to consider the offer, but then Mrs. Jenkins called for her, and the moment was lost. That night, Robert couldn't concentrate on anything. He cancelled an important meeting and paced back and forth in his office, thinking about Jessica and her mother in the hospital. For the first time in 3 years, someone else's pain affected him more than his own ghosts. It was then that Victoria entered his office without knocking. "Robert, we need to talk." "Not now, Victoria." "Yes, now." She closed the door behind her. "I know about this woman." Robert turned slowly. "What woman?" "The waitress from that cheap restaurant where you've been having lunch. Jessica Miller, 25 years old. Lives in a small apartment in the West Side district with her sick mother. Works 2 jobs to pay the bills. Dropped out of college in her 2nd year." Robert felt a cold anger rising up his spine. "How dare you?" "How dare I? Robert, you're getting involved with a person who is clearly interested in your money. Can't... You see, she's manipulating you. You don't know her. I know enough. A young, beautiful woman with financial difficulties who suddenly arouses the interest of one of the richest men in the city. Robert, you've always been smarter than this. Get out of my office." "I won't leave. Someone needs to protect you." "From yourself. Elizabeth wouldn't want to see you being used like this." The mention of Elizabeth was the trigger. Robert exploded. "Don't you dare speak her name. You have no right." "Yes, I do. I care about you, Robert. I always have. Since before Elizabeth, during her marriage, and after she left. I've been here the whole time, waiting for you to recover, and now I'm going to let an opportunist destroy everything." Victoria's confession hung in the air like a painful admission. Robert finally understood the motivations behind her concern. "Leave," he said, with a dangerous calm. "And if you try to interfere in my personal life again, I'll consider it a breach of trust that will have professional consequences." Victoria left, but Robert knew that the war had only just begun. The next day, Robert arrived at Home Flavor, determined to have an honest conversation with Jessica. He found her even more dejected than the day before. "How's your mother?" he asked. The surgery was postponed. I'm trying to get a loan, but... She left the sentence hanging. Robert took a deep breath. Jessica, there's something I need to tell you. My name is Robert Anderson. I own Anderson Developments. Jessica looked at him without understanding for a moment. Then, slowly, the information registered. Robert saw in her eyes a succession of emotions: surprise, understanding, and then what hurt him the most, distrust. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I wanted you to know me as Robert, not as the rich businessman. And why are you telling me now? Robert struggled to find the right words. Because I want to help your mother, not as a stranger giving charity, but as someone who cares about you. Jessica took a step back. Cares about me? Mr. Anderson, you don't even know me. Yes, I do. I know that you hum softly while seasoning the food. I know that you always ask about Mrs. Jenkins's grandchildren. I know that you dream of having a physical therapy clinic someday. I know that you are strong, brave, and generous in a way that makes me want to be a better man. Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes. Why are you doing this to me? Because, for the first time in 3 years, I feel alive when I'm near you. It was then that Robert told her about Elizabeth, about the pain of loss, about how he had closed himself off from the world. He told about the 3 years of emptiness, about how work had become his only reason to exist. I don't want to live like that anymore, he said. I don't know if this is love, Jessica. I don't know if I'm still capable of loving someone, but I know that you make me feel hope. Jessica cried silently. Robert, we're from completely different worlds. I wouldn't know how to live in your world. And I don't want you to live in my world. I want to learn to live in yours. In the months that followed, Robert proved he was serious. He sold the mansion and bought a simple but comfortable house. He drastically reduced his involvement in business, delegating responsibilities and prioritizing quality of life over endless profits. Victoria was transferred to another division of the company after trying to spread rumors about Robert's relationship. Jessica returned to college, with Robert supporting her studies not just financially, but emotionally, taking a genuine interest in her classes and projects. Her mother recovered completely from the surgery and became a big fan of Robert, amused by his awkward attempts to help in the kitchen. Robert discovered simple pleasures he had forgotten existed. Lazy Sundays watching movies, walks in the park, home-cooked dinners where conversation was more important than the food. He discovered that happiness wasn't in his bank account numbers, but in genuine smiles, tight hugs, quiet nights beside someone who loved him for the man he was, not for the empire he had built. At the end of their first year together, Robert proposed to Jessica in a simple proposal at Home Flavor itself, at the table where they had met. There were no expensive diamonds or elaborate settings, just the sincere promise of two hearts that had learned that true love is born from the courage to allow oneself to be vulnerable. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that Robert and Jessica's story has touched your hearts the same way it touched ours. This narrative reminds us that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in the genuine connections we build. To continue this emotional journey with us, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging stories that explore the complexity of love and redemption. You can find it by clicking here. If this story awakened any emotion in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day, we bring unique narratives that celebrate the human capacity to transform and find happiness even after the greatest losses. Don't miss our next content, and please share in the comments which part of the story